Good afternoon and welcome everyone to a new edition of our Si Se Puede webinar series. We're here with our colleague Michelle Lopez. She will be presenting today. Hello, Michelle. My name is Valeria Praga Rodriguez. I serve on the CABE board and I have been leading these webinars for the 2020-2021 school year, and it's been a great experience. So thank you all for being here. I also work, my full-time job is as an instructional coordinator in Denver Public Schools. Today's webinar and workshop is called Project Recuerdo, a critical and culturally sustaining bilingual family journal project, and will be presented by my colleague Michelle Lopez. She's a teacher in Denver Public Schools. And as many of you might know, you can make this experience either a webinar, which is the first hour, or you can make the whole workshop experience, which is the webinar plus the cafe. We're calling it the late cafe. It started as two separate experiences on two separate dates, and then we put them together into one day. So if you're able to join us for the whole time, we're going to do the webinar from 4:30 to 5:30. Then we will have a short 15-minute break and we will start our cafe at 5:45 and we will go until 7 p.m. And that will be a space where we collaborate as colleagues, we process the information that Michelle will be presenting, and we learn from each other. So it's a wonderful opportunity if you can stay. Also, if you are getting ready to renew your license through CDE, we know that teachers need to present evidence of 90 hours of professional development. If you stay for the whole 2.5 hours and you request your certificate, we ask that people pay a $10 fee, just a processing fee, but then you can get a certificate of attendance that counts towards your renewal. So it's a great opportunity if you want to. It's not too late. You can still request that, and you can ask us in the chat if you don't know how to register for that. So what we're going to do after a quick break, Michelle has agreed to stay with us a little bit longer. Thank you, Michelle. And we will have some time for Q&A, because you will notice that during the webinar hour, she will be presenting and she will pause for some processing time, but we're not gonna ask for your reflections, but we will do it afterwards. So if you're able to stay a little bit longer than the first hour, Michelle will be answering some questions that you might have that might refer to your specific situation or anything that you would like to go deeper on. You have a note catcher. Liliana, thank you for handling our chat tonight. She will put the link in the chat. This will force you to make your own copy of this note catcher, where we have some of the pieces that Michelle will be presenting tonight, some spaces for you to record your reflections, some information, all the references for the wonderful research that she used to create this wonderful strategy. So feel free to open this document, keep it on a separate tab so you can refer back to it. And then we also have, and on the last page, we have some links that might help you as well for COCABE business. And then once again, Liliana, thank you for being on the chat. We will keep the chat going, even if you're not able to answer every question live. Please feel free to use the chat. Our friend Liliana Sanchez, she's here with us. She's a colleague also in Denver Public Schools, and she's bilingual. So feel free to ask any questions in English and in Spanish. She will answer those that she can, and if not, we'll take them to the cafe. Or we can email you if there's anything specific that we don't have an answer for you. Make sure to leave your email address so we can contact you afterwards. And we have been doing, when the pandemic started, we tried to find a way to continue to connect with teachers and continue to provide professional development beyond the annual conference. So we came up with this idea of doing the webinars every 6 to 8 weeks. So this will be the last webinar for this school year, for the 2020-21 school year. It has been a wonderful experience, but we will return in September next year. We're not sure what the format will be, but we have learned from teacher feedback that the virtual option works because people don't have to commute and they can be home with their kids and still continue to learn. So it's very likely that we will continue with the same format so teachers have easy access. In the meantime, if you would like to continue learning throughout the summer, and on the last page of the note catcher, you have a link to a document that gives you access to all the links to the recordings from the 2020 webinars that we did. We have Dr. Sue Hopewell presenting about oracy. We presented about cross-language transfer for English and Spanish. We have sheltered instruction presented by Dr. Loretta Chavez, and we have a presentation about dual language instruction for both in-person and remote learning that was presented by Heather Lamont. So this is a document that gives you access to those four, but you can also go to the COCABE website, and on the section for the Si Se Puede webinars, you have access to the other recordings as well for the ones that we have done in 2021. So feel free to access those, share with colleagues so you can continue learning even if it's not in the live setting. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Michelle Lopez. I met Michelle a couple years ago when she was working at a different school. And when her colleagues introduced her, they couldn't say enough about how wonderful she is. She's our fourth grade teacher. She gets the best results ever. Our bilingual kids have the best results because she is amazing and she gets to engage the kids and the families. And then she presented at our COCABE conference in February this year, and she got really good feedback, and I was able to watch her session and fell in love with this project. So I invited her to present today because I think it's very helpful for teachers to learn different ways in which they can engage families and make them part of their daily instruction. So I'm going to read a little bit of short bio about Michelle, and then I'm going to give you the floor so you can start sharing your content. Michelle Lopez is a proud Denver native who serves the Globeville community as a fourth grade ELAS and ELA teacher at Garden Place Academy. She began her career as a paraprofessional in Denver Public Schools in 2004. And since 2007, she has taught various grade levels, including third grade, sixth grade, and 2 years as a first grade teacher. Michelle obtained her master's degree in educational equity and cultural diversity at the University of Colorado Boulder and fully commits to social justice education and culturally sustaining pedagogy. She's also a dedicated Denver community member and a DPS parent. So Michelle, once again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Colega Valeria. I appreciate your kind words, and I am so excited to be with all of you this evening. I appreciate this opportunity to share this project, which I call Project Recuerdo. So thank you to all of the teachers for coming this afternoon. I know it's been an extremely challenging and long school year, and you are still here to hear about this project. And I hope that it will serve you and the community that you collaborate with. And so this project is Project Recuerdo, and it is a critical and culturally sustaining family journal project where students mainly, but families too, write in a journal about different stories and experiences that they've had. Next slide, please. Okay, so today I'm going to share a home to school practice that draws upon and integrates the family's experiential knowledge and really to validate culturally and linguistically diverse communities that we have the honor of serving, and also to make those curricula connections. So really to bring this into the academic realm of all that we do. And so right now I will begin with a little bit of theoretical background. I will also describe the actual process and all that this bilingual family journal entails, and then I will share my own personal experience with applying this project, answer some frequently asked questions that I've been asked throughout the last 3 years. I originally created this project through Colorado University at Boulder through the Educational Equity and Cultural Diversity program and it was a requirement to develop a family engagement project. So I really did want to go much farther with the work that I was already doing with the community. And it always felt wonderful to develop trusting and strong relationships with the families that I served. However, I wanted just to take it bring it into my classroom and really have it positively impact the academics that we deal with as teachers on a daily basis. And so it all started as I was thinking of the project that I wanted to create as part of the master's program. We were asked a few questions about our own past, and so I thought about, who were my teachers, and I didn't have much. I didn't have my mother and father um, frequently and consistently throughout my childhood, but I did have my grandparents. And so through the program, we did, explore the fact that families include uh, moms and dads, but they also include grandparents, our aunts and uncles, even foster parents. So when I refer to family, I refer to any adult, any caretaker that is involved and really tries to contribute to the student's education. And so when I was thinking of my grandparents, I thought, well, what is it that they did for me in the academic sense? And also the socio-emotional sense, cultural identity, and I realized that they didn't necessarily have a formal education um, that we would like for all families, all people to have access to. My grandma didn't. She came from the San Luis Valley in Colorado. She finished up to 6th grade. My grandpa finished up to the 8th grade, but my grandpa was an avid reader. He talked to me constantly about what he read, and my grandmother in the middle, she would sit with me on the porch, or we'd walk around that lake, Berkeley Lake right there, and we would talk, and she would tell me stories. She would tell me stories about her growing up. She would tell me stories about her raising her 6 children. And then I also thought of my daughter. She's now 14, but she's in that picture with my grandfather. And she, now I realize how busy that I am, especially as a single mom with 3 kids. And as a teacher, I don't have as much time as I would like. And I'm starting to see that a lot with the families that I work with. We have very busy schedules, whether we have a profession or we have, a long work week. We really are very busy people this day and age. So I thought, well, let's go back to those stories. And that is why I titled it Project Recuerdo, de recordar, right? To remember our past and share it, but then to also document it within the journal itself. And then later on, it becomes an actual keepsake item or a recuerdo. So that is that's the background of why I created this project. Okay, so here's the theoretical framework. It begins with funds of knowledge, which I will go into in just a moment, but to really hone in on what the families already have. And then community cultural wealth, the idea that there is definitely, absolutely something that each family can contribute to academics specifically, but to other areas as well. And then also culturally sustaining, going back to, well, let's not lose these stories. Let's not lose this knowledge, these skills, these experiences. Let's really hold on to them as much as possible. And so here it is, asset-based versus deficit-based. This is definitely an issue that we see nationwide. We tend to look at what is missing instead of what we already have. So oftentimes in our schools, we are approaching family and community engagement as problems to fix. We see, for example, this school year, I heard a lot about, from different teachers throughout the district, the families, they don't understand technology. The families may not know how to support their student with math, things like that. And not to say that there isn't a need, to support our families, and to give them whatever it is that they would like to understand in order to help their student, but they're not problems to fix. And barriers in bridging the school and family experience is often caused by that perceived lack of skills and knowledge, which also is very rooted in bias and prejudice. And so instead, we often we don't recognize that cultural capital of marginalized communities, their skills, their knowledge, their social networks, and the way in which they support each other, because our school systems are structured to uphold white, English, monolingual, middle class ways of being. And I will be referring to that throughout this project so that I can just demonstrate to you how this project restructures things a little bit in order to deter from that. And then lastly, as a consequence, education tends to rely on the relationship dynamics and traditional methods of involving families that reflect white middle class norms. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So typically we see in our schools, things are very one way. We tend to see, and I'm speaking in general terms, but we tend to see our families as receivers of the knowledge that we could pass along to them as educators. And that's definitely something that we could do. That's within our capacity and within our responsibilities, but it's that's something that's been prioritized, whereas we could also prioritize a more of a bi-directional way of sharing that knowledge and experience. And so speaking of that, this really taps into Community Cultural Wealth by Yoso, 2005. And this is more, instead of that one way, it's more of a bridge. And here we have, we're accessing, so they're not just, the families aren't necessarily only accessing what we have to offer, but we're accessing the family's cultural capital and really making it applicable and meaningful within the school setting during academic lessons. And then also, this is definitely beneficial to enhance school curricula because we are connecting home values and school expectations and finding that common ground. And then by doing so, we're disrupting oppressive structures. And right, so, and this is, I wanted to mention something here. Something that I've recognized within the last year especially is having it being bi-directional, we're able to hold every family accountable because every family has something to offer. Okay, so culturally sustaining, what do I mean by that? So again, I put the map of where Alamosa and the San Luis Valley is located. And I go back and I think of all of the stories and all of the knowledge that my grandparents shared with me through just the oral tradition, just sitting down and talking. And that's a special skill and talent that I've also seen within the families that I've served. Also, when I lived in Mexico for several years, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with different family members, and it was just a treasure, an absolute treasure. And just hearing that spoken word. So we're really relying on storytelling with this project. And, it's also important to maintain those cultural bonds and to really bring, grandma, abuela, el abuelo, el tío, el primo, even the vecino, maybe just really bringing in different people from the community and connecting them with our students. And therefore, later we connect as educators with those people. And identity development, because without knowing these stories, it's hard to understand where we came from. And that's something that really saved me later on during my education, during my undergrad work, just holding that. It was just something that really kept me grounded. Knowing exactly, who I am and that I do come from strong people. And because I was once validated, right? So we're validating students and their families' lived experiences, and we're connecting that to literacy practices mainly. And then you'll see that in the end, it's beautiful. This leads to a discovery of many mutual goals and values. And we discover that we have much more in common than what we think. And so for this particular project, I do want to emphasize that relationships, developing, going beyond business type of relationships is extremely important. So relationships take time, but they're definitely essential for the work that we do, and then also for this project. And I love this quote from Cody, 2019, we should evolve from learning about families to learning with them and from them. So really just making it a partnership where we are all on the same team. One is not above the other. We are in collaboration with each other, and we develop trust, and we continue to communicate as much as possible, and everybody on that wheel that was there. Okay, so I just want to take a moment and hear from you, a little bit of an icebreaker. What stories do you wish you knew of your own family, or perhaps you already have heard lots of stories? What stories do you already know about your own family? And this is also located within the note catcher. So do we have any brave souls that will be willing to share? Si se puede. Oh, so Paula wishes she knew more about her mother's side of the family. Okay. Is there anything in particular about your mother's family, Paula, that you would like to know about?
Um, I'll comment on it. After my mother died, I got really sentimental, and I did a family tree and researched a lot. And the English-speaking side of my family was very easy to research, but because I speak Spanish, I wasn't very good at researching the German side. So I'm sad that I can't really reach out and get that information. And I think sometimes when I talk to my students and their families, they have gaps in their knowledge of families too. So that's why I think this is exciting too. I think it's important for the families and the kids. So there's information that, yeah, I'm using Ancestry and those kind of things, but it's complicated, especially if you don't know the language you're searching in. So,
Right.
so, and I think it's, very complicated for my students' families as well. We do immigration projects and projects where they research, and there's always gaps in what they can find out.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, especially, where exactly what our origin is. How is it that we got to where we are at this moment? And yes, thank you so much, Paula. I hope that this afternoon you will have lots of ideas to take away. And yes, our grandparents, I wish I knew how my grandparents met, and another grandmother who passed before Caitlin was born. Yes, I think that our grandparents definitely have a whole lot of wisdom and knowledge to share with us. And so I look forward to sharing some questions that can narrow it down and support you with understanding even your own family, and asking the questions that will get you to where you would like to go. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so here's the fun part. I like to think of this project, I'd like to describe it in 3 steps. And these are the 3 steps, like a cycle that you can go through as you are working through to set up all of this great work. So the first and most important step is to send students home with a series of questions that are rooted in previous and upcoming lessons. And of course, they go home. I like to frame it to my fourth graders as interview questions, but of course it depends on the grade level, but I'll talk a little bit more about how to write those questions. So they go home and as homework, and they sit down with their families around the table or wherever. I usually give them a few weeks to do this, and they talk, they ask their families these questions. Then the students, my fourth graders, because of their age, they write down what they heard. Occasionally, I do have family members that support them with the writing process, and I will get into that in a minute. I do want to mention, I put that image of a window because many times these questions, the questions themselves, can serve as a window, allowing families to see and understand at a deeper level as to what the students are working on within the classroom. Then once they bring the journals back, I take a moment and I read every single journal entry. I respond to each family with a personal message, and that's also to develop those trusting relationships. And usually I have a lesson in mind, but I definitely adapt and reconfigure some of the lessons that I have already set up, depending on what the content of the journals are. And last but not least, I find a way to present the final, the actual work, that the end product that the students created from the journal entries themselves. So here I'll go into depth for step one. So students go home, they ask their family members specific questions, and then the student writes in the journal. And I want to emphasize the student writing in the journal because I've seen how valuable it is. I find that most families will sit down and help their student with the writing process. They'll many times have them, rewrite using different language. They will help them with mechanics and conventions, handwriting, and it becomes good writing practice. And so I have a few tips here for this particular step. And the first one is modeled authentic writing from the teacher. So I have 3 children and they are a little older than they're 4th grade and up. So I do this project with my children here at home. And it's great because I can model exactly the amount of writing and the way in which I am creating my paragraphs, give tips to parents as to what kind of writing I'm expecting from them. But it's also an opportunity for me to be vulnerable with my families. And that also contributes to healthy relationship development because I figure if they're going to share personal information with me, then I should hold myself to that same expectation. And if you don't have children, I do have a friend that's tried this project with her own classroom, and she many times will just write her own mini paragraph or longer, and she will send a copy of her writing and her experiences, depending on the question the questions that were presented. Another thing that I would like to emphasize and suggest is definitely encourage the use of native language as an option for families. It of course, by doing so, we're validating their cultural identities and their experience and their knowledge. And I'm a bilingual teacher, and so I'm able to do that. But I have heard a few teachers say that they have received, a particular language that they don't understand. And there are different people. I know, for example, in Denver Public Schools, we have different people within our buildings that can support us with that. And the students themselves mainly are the ones who are able to be the ones to interpret what their families have shared with them. And then the last tip that I have is encourage visuals and memorabilia, such as photographs, maybe, letters or postcards or anything that is attached to the story itself. It just makes it more meaningful and extra special. And then, of course, a response from teacher, like I was saying, it's usually just a little sticky note, or, maybe sometimes if it's something, it's a very special story that they've shared, where they've spent extra time and really have opened up their hearts. I'll send a little note, a card home, and just a gesture to show respect and honor their willingness to be vulnerable and to share and contribute in this way. And so here are some example interview questions. So I'm going to lead you to through one of the projects. I usually have about 4 different journal entries or activities, we could call them, that I do every year. This one in particular, I send out in October to prepare for El Día de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. I don't present it as El Día de los Muertos. I just call it Nuestros Antepasados, our ancestors. And I break up the questions. So I've recognized through the work that I've done already that it's very helpful to narrow the questions and make them very specific. So these are the actual questions that I've sent home last school year, as well as this one. So what does our family do to remember our past loved ones? And question 2, share a story about a past loved one. Question 3, what was this person like? And 4, what did you learn from this person? And there's just so much room for flexibility and adaptability as well. I have had a few people or families let me know that they don't necessarily have a past loved one. So it's open to, well, is there a person, a historical figure that you would like your student to know about? And through discussion and collaboration with family members, it's possible. And so those are some examples. And then here, this is just an example of the writing that I did with my son. And this is what I would send first, along with the questions themselves. I would send that home. Over here to the right, this is an example of how I've responded to families. I know that one's just on a sticky note, but on other occasions, like I said, I'll get stickers and just, some very pretty stationery, just as a gesture of love and respect. And so here you have an opportunity on your note catcher to start thinking of a project for, or I should say, one of the journal entry activities for your next school year. So for step 1, what family story might you ask of your students to record in their journals? How does this story connect with the curriculum that you use? And then write 2 questions. It could even just be 1, but 2 is a good way to begin. 2 questions that your students could ask their families in order to promote deeper dialogue about that story. Okay, so I will continue with step 2. Once the content or once the journals are, the students have finished writing their journal entries, and I've read every single journal entry, have sent home a quick note, I create the lesson. Like I said, I usually have an idea as to what I'd like to do, but as we know as teachers, with all lesson planning, adaptations occur depending on the actual content of the journal. Sometimes I see, wow, they're talking about, you know, X and Y and Z. I can really make this something different, or I can add to the lesson that I had in mind. So for the particular questions that I shared with you about honoring our ancestors, nuestros antepasados, the lesson itself that I've tried 2 years now in a row is letter writing from the perspective of the deceased family member or friend or historical figure, like I had mentioned. Other possible lessons that I've seen as I've read their journal entries is comparing Halloween and Day of the Dead, because the first question was, how do we honor our past loved ones? Me as a fourth grade ELA S and ELA E teacher in the Globeville community, I had the majority of my family speak of Day of the Dead. And it was just, they gave so much rich knowledge and experience that it was just, there was just so, there was not one online resource that could compare to the amount of information that the families gave to us. So that was a great opportunity to compare. Well, we have all of this information about what Halloween is online, and then we can also compare it to what our family said about Day of the Dead. And then also even within all of the journal entries about Day of the Dead, I found so many regional variations. So there's also an opportunity to compare different ways that Day of the Dead is honored and celebrated and practiced within different regions of Mexico and even South America. And so I wanted to share the actual lesson objective with you for this school year. So we were online, and this was one of the slides that I shared with my students. And so the lesson about the deceased, the past loved one, the deceased past loved one is, became an ELD lesson, an English language development lesson. And so we use ELA Achieve curriculum. So using the language structures that curriculum provided, I was able to use the content of the journals to create a letter as in first person as the deceased loved one. So the objective was to use complex sentences. We applied used to, would, but now with adverbs of time, and I'll show you on the next slide exactly how that looked for the students. And so we did a lot of, we practiced a lot of dialogue with each other before the writing process. But this was the main question. How did you used to be before you became, whatever it is that you became? And how often did you show that characteristic? And so students were practicing as if they were their relative or friend. And then I will show you now what it turned into. So after that talking piece, the students wrote the letter as that family member. So here we have one of my students speaking of her uncle, or as her uncle, and she has, hello, my name is Elias, and I was Milena's uncle. I was from Chihuahua, and I moved to Texas since I wanted a better life for my family. And then here we have the language structures. I would always work at my job as a cook at Chili's and Black Eyed Pea. I used to hang out with my two kids to play games at arcades and the park, but now I watch them from heaven. And so we did this online, but last school year we did it, on a piece of paper, and we added it to an altar, which I will show you in a moment. And so here you have an opportunity for step 2 to start thinking about how the story that you thought of for step 1, how could the writing content produced from the questions contribute to the instruction in your classroom in your specific situation. Okay, so for the last and final step, which ends up being something beautiful for all stakeholders, is to present the final product to the school community. And there are multiple ways to do this. Here are just a few ideas. So mainly I relied on hallway displays, and it drew attention to the entire school community, to our school leadership, to other teachers within the building, to families that were walking in and out of the building, other students within the school. And it really ended up being something that informed the school community of the family's knowledge, skills, and experiences. And then also I've found that organizing events with stakeholders, even if it's through a video call. I will be doing a poetry slam, for example, next week through a Zoom call with families, and the poetry that we are presenting to the families is based off of a journal entry. So it's an opportunity for everybody to come together, not to just celebrate, which definitely is something we need to do: celebrate, uplift, validate. But we also, I've also noticed that a lot of other community members, stakeholders, like I said, school leadership, other teachers, they learn something and can reconstruct their own preconceived notions or understanding of a situation. So last school year, this is what we did. We created a school community altar, and on the altar, that's where we wrote that's where we placed the letters that we wrote as our past loved ones with their photograph. And then they had an opportunity to bring different objects, based off of what they learned from their families about El Dia de los Muertos, and the conversations that we had. So that was the product of a journal. And then like you could see here, a lot of different teachers and community members stopped and read what they had. And this is just a close-up just to show you what it looked like. And then also I just wanted to mention, for October of 2018, we created a community altar, and it became something that was school-wide. So even though within my classroom, it was just my classroom that wrote these paragraphs through our ELD lesson, it still leaves an opportunity for other people within other other students and other teachers within the building to participate. And a lot of different families from other classrooms contributed to an altar that we set up at Denver Botanic Gardens. And since we were online this school year, instead of having a physical in-person altar, my students created a virtual altar. So that was a lot of fun with Google Slides. So there's some adaptability now that we have been relying a whole lot on technology. And here, so I had mentioned already that sometimes these displays can be very informing for everybody. And this is an example. So one journal activity that I do at the very beginning of the school year is I ask all families to describe a story or to share a story about a historical event that they have celebrated, and I'll give them examples such as 4th of July or Mexican Independence Day, but I make it very broad so that all experiences are honored. Maybe it's Juneteenth, maybe it's Cinco de Mayo, whatever the historical event is, they share a story about it. And it's wonderful because you can compare backgrounds. So that was some of the work that came out of it, the actual lessons themselves. They ended up speaking as to where their families came from. There was a question about that. They practiced language of directionality. They got to plot the family's origins. So that's when families or other teachers within the building would walk by, and they would see that a lot of my students, they came not only from one part of Mexico, for example, the northern area of Mexico, they came from all areas of Mexico and even from Guatemala and El Salvador. And there are definitely lots of opportunity for metalinguistic comparison. So with bilingual students, it was a lot of fun and very, very helpful for their language development to differentiate as how we would say my mom's family, for example, versus la familia de mi mamá, and language of directionality too. How we would say, well, my family is from the north, while your family is from the south, or just to use that different language and compare how we would say it in one language versus the other. Okay, and so the last and final step, adelante. How could you connect the families, school leaders, and the greater school community? Poetry slams, visual or Google Slides, presenting that on a video call, or altars and gatherings. Those are just some ideas. I'm sure that you all have a whole lot more. And yes, it's very important for all of us to connect. And so here we have some additional ideas and some interview questions themselves. So you'll see there that I have share why you named your child what you did. And we have over a possible lesson. This is something that I did for El Día de los Niños that was on April 30th, that's celebrated in Mexico and in some places within South America. So we have share why you named your child what you did, and we did a name poem based off of what the children wrote in their journals. We could have paragraph writing, and another one is share a story that makes you feel proud of your child. What did she do? Why did it make you feel proud? And one like that I had already mentioned that we did at the very beginning of the school year for the historic events. Share a story of a moment that your family celebrated a historic event. We have created invitations, so they don't always have to be so heavy in writing. It could be an invitation. We could compare. Again, comparing comes up a whole lot because we have so much to share with each other. So compare how different families celebrate. And I added that book, Me Llamo Yun, on the bottom because I'm thinking of my younger children, younger students that are still learning how to write. So I will share a little bit more in the next slide as to how you could support younger children with this project. Here, this is something that's this is more intermediate and secondary. So this is something that I'm working on currently. The lesson itself is comparing how an accomplished family member has been as resilient as an agent of change. So I did see something about anti-racism efforts. So with this particular one, we studied 3 different biographies about 3 different women during the month of March. So one is Naomi Glasses. She's a young lady from the Navajo Nation that has a TikTok video that went viral, and she has a cleft palate and lip. She was just extremely resilient, didn't have a skate park like she desired, was told that she's a girl, that she couldn't skateboard. And so she went to the desert landscape, started creating videos, and has just been attempting to skateboard her entire life. And so her video went viral. There's an article written about her. So that's an example of what we did in class. Then the students went home and asked those questions in blue about the family member, and a family member, a woman within their family that has accomplished something great. And so now within my class, we are comparing how our family members are as resilient as somebody such as Naomi Glasses. And so FAQs, here we have, how long does a writing activity typically require? And this is also within your, within the note catcher where you have more resources. And I usually give my families 3 weeks. Sometimes if, depending on how things are going, I give them just 2 weeks, but then I also give myself an extra week, that kind of like a grace period that not everybody knows about. And it's just an extra week for me to reach out to families that haven't given me the journals, because that's going to happen. And then I move forward with my lesson. So yes, families do feel uncomfortable at times with sharing their personal experiences, especially at the beginning when they don't know us very well. But it's a great opportunity to build relationships with them and to break down those barriers and really see, you know, that we're on the same team. And like I said, I attempt to model vulnerability with my own children, with sharing my own stories first. And then I do have some students and families who've struggled with completing it, but let me tell you, it's mostly been because they believe that they don't have the skills to fulfill the activity requirements, and they always do. So I tell them, I said, look, you've lived, you have a, you know a lot about life, and sharing that with your child is doing the work. And so some moms especially have said, you know, I don't feel comfortable with my writing, and then that's my opportunity to say, your writing is great. And so just to validate and to really build that relationship. And then last but not least, going back to ECE and primary students. So the writing doesn't have to be pages long. I think it could gradually increase as the students acquire stronger writing skills. I've heard of an ECE teacher just having drawing, creating an illustration of the story that they shared with their young child, and then maybe just writing one word, having the ECE student trace the word, or having even writing a whole sentence, and then having the ECE student maybe write just one of the words within the sentence. There's lots of ways that writing can be adapted to support the younger children. And then some troubleshooting. It kind of overlaps a little bit here. So are you feeling overwhelmed? You can definitely feel overwhelmed with this project. It is a lot of work. It is definitely worth it. And I promise you that in the end, you will feel so, so good about the outcome of all of this. And yes, so ease into it. Give yourself some extra time. If you need more than 2 weeks to collect journals, make it 3. You know, maybe the 4th week you give that time just to reach out to families that are not responding. And then trying this at least a couple times a school year is a great way to start. I highly encourage twice, because, you know, maybe one time you are going to learn a lot from the first time and you'll be able to apply it for the second time. Like I said, I do this usually about 5 or 6 times a year, depending on how it's going. And if you're not receiving a journal entry from every family, please don't be discouraged. Many families will, for them, it's going to be a new experience, but you'll feel it on the second or the third time. The families are enjoying it. I've heard a lot of great things from families as to, wow, you know, I never would have shared that story with my child if it hadn't been for these questions. And it's setting expectations, high expectations for all families. And like I said, add that extra week after the due date, just to give yourself time to reach out to the families. And then if you're struggling with finding a lesson, something that I've had to tell myself is that not every lesson has to be so complex, such as the one that I'm doing, where we're comparing this, an agent of change with an accomplished family member within an essay. That's intense, but it could just be, it could even be a conversation, with language structures. It could be a short constructed response, and even a poem. And then here are a few more. If you ever have some questions that are left unanswered, you could restructure the questions themselves, because I've found that sometimes I'm asking 2 questions within one, and I'll just send home the child with the journal and the one specific question, and they respond very well. The kids really like this project, so they're very engaged and motivated to do the work. And don't be afraid to ask families, call them on the phone and say, hey, you know what? Senora, would you please talk with your son about this one question? He's missing it, and they're usually very excited and willing to do that. And then if you ever have, I've only had this happen with one family, a family showing disinterest in this project, and really wanting to know more about the why. Just go for it. Go for it. Tell them, be clear and honest about the why of this project. And I do tell families, I'm very, very explicit and direct about how this educational system, as I mentioned very much earlier within the presentation, that we are constantly, relying on information that we find from our own resources or from ourselves within our educational system, instead of pulling from the information that and the skills and the knowledge that our families can give to us. So I always tell parents, like, this is a way for you to shine. This is a way for you to be in my classroom, because that's another thing. A lot of times, speaking of our traditional ways of family engagement, it's typically, we need families physically present within our classrooms in order to call it family engagement. But with this project, they're there in spirit, and their skills and knowledge are documented on a piece of paper, ready to be incorporated within our lessons. And there's my email, and I am here for you. It's something that this is a wonderful project that I'm very grateful to be able to share with you. And if you need me, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Michelle, thank you so much. We've got some very positive comments.